31st session of the General Assembly, and if not possible before the 31st session of the General Assembly, at the next session of the General Assembly, regional meetings to establish guidelines for the coordination within each region of action to be taken in order to deal with human settlements problems and to report to the General Assembly on the results of their deliberation. If there's no comment, may I assume that this is accepted by consensus? So, do I hear anyone asking for the floor? If not, if it's accepted, it is so decided. I'm sorry. The distinguished representative of Brazil.
The Brazilian delegation has joined the consensus on draft resolution containing document A/Conference 70/L7 and wishes now to place on record that said document was circulated only today. In view of its importance and implications, I shall submit to my government for deliberation and decision. Therefore, sir, my adherence to the consensus was taken at the referendum of my government, which may deem necessary to express further views on the matter. I thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative from Brazil. The representative of the Economic Commission for Latin America. Representative of the Economic Commission for Latin America does not have his own microphone and is thus coming to the podium.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking on behalf of ECLA, I should like to express my satisfaction for the resolution just approved by the conference and to assure you that within our possibilities, ECLA will do its utmost to serve its member countries in the field of human settlements. Of course, we are ready to continue our work in behalf of the wishes and problems of the region. At the same time, I am very honored, Mr. President, in conveying at the request of my colleagues, the representatives of the other economic commissions who are participating in this conference, to express the very same feelings with respect to the regions they represent and to support this measure with the same sympathy. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Economic Commission for Latin America. We now turn to the report of Committee 1 on Agenda Item 9, entitled Declaration of Principles. I invite the rapporteur of the committee, Ms. Kirsten Oldfeldt of Sweden, to present the report in document A-Comp 70/14.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I shall be very brief this time. The committee was allocated item 9, that is the Declaration of Principles, by the conference at the second plenary meeting on 31 May 1976. The report of the committee on its consideration of item 9 is now before you in document A Conference 70/14. Let me describe very briefly the proceedings which led the committee to the decision contained in part 2 of this report. The committee first held a general debate. That debate is summarized in section 2 of part 1 of the report before you. At its second meeting, the committee decided to establish a working group to consider the draft declaration of principles and the amendments submitted thereto. The working group was open-ended, consisting of a core group of 10 members, 2 drawn from each regional group. In spite of long and protracted consultations, it was not possible for the working group to present to Committee 1 an agreed proposal for a draft declaration of principles. In view of the time constraint, the committee, at its meeting this morning, decided to transmit to the plenary for its consideration the documents relating to item 9 as listed in part 2 of the report. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the rapporteur of Committee 1. May I once again remind delegates that in accordance with the decisions of the conference, delegations will be given an opportunity to make statements on the recommendations of the committee only after action has been taken on them. I now invite delegates to turn their attention to the first to part 1 of the report concerning the organization of work and summary of the general discussion. May I take it that the conference takes note of that part of the report? So decided. We turn now to part 2 of the report containing the decisions of the committee. The committee has returned several documents without recommendation. The distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. As stated by our distinguished rapporteur, we find in part 2 of document ACOM 70-14 the documents which were considered, and that the committee was not able to arrive at a conclusive decision as regards the recommendation that be submitted to the plenary. In the report of the chairman of the working group of Committee 1 on item 9, the Declaration of Principles, and paragraph 3 of document ACOM 70, stroke C1, stroke L11, it states that the working group had before it document ACOM 70, stroke C1, WG1, CRP1, which is a paper of the group of 77. This paper has been the subject of intensive consultations for almost a week, round the clock at times, and was the basis of discussion and the working group. Here in this plenary, Mr. Chairman, this is the paper which the group of 7 proposes should be the basis of our discussion. In other words, we should take a decision on this paper because this is the only paper here that has been sponsored by governments. Mr. Chairman, I assume, therefore, that the paper of the Group of 77, ACOM 70/C1, WG1 CRP1, is the basis of the decision that will be taken up by the plenary. If I am correct in my decision and my assumption, Mr. Chairman, I shall proceed to introduce it.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines. Is it the wish of the conference that the document just referred to, commonly known as the paper of the Group of 77, be considered the working document? The distinguished representative of Australia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sure we would all agree that this seems a logical course of action. However, I suggest that first we adopt the report of Committee 1 and then proceed to deal with this paper as a plenary matter. Thank you.
Yes, I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. That was the intention and determined that. Well, then this concludes our consideration of the reports of Committee 1 on agenda items 9 and 11. If that is acceptable to the conference. Okay. Then may I express my gratitude to the Bureau and members of the committee and to all members of working groups for their hard work and for the results achieved. Then we now turn our attention to the document itself. Which is now the working paper. Copies of it. This is now the draft declaration of principles, Group of 77, document ACOMF 70/C1/WG1/CRP1. And core agendum 1. The distinguished representative from Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this stage of the debate, I would just like to have some clarification from you. There's some difficulty with the French text of document CRP1 Corrigendum 1. It is not exactly the same as the English text. I'd like to be sure that it is the English, which is the official text. It was submitted in English, and I would like the Secretariat to correct the French text. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. The distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I'd like to make corrections to the text of the document before us. The very title itself should read as follows: Vancouver Declaration on Human Settlements, 1976. We thought it is more elegant that way. I will draw the attention of delegates to Part 2, General Principles, page 4, paragraph 4. I will have an addition to make in the last line of that paragraph. And this will solve the problem of the French delegation, I think. After racial discrimination, comma, and here are the words we would add: referred to in the resolutions as adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. I will read the entire sentence. It is therefore the duty of all people and governments to join in the struggle against any form of colonialism, foreign aggression, and occupation, comma, domination, comma, apartheid, and all forms of racism and racial discrimination, comma, referred to in the resolutions as adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations. On paragraph 12, I would invite delegates to the report of the chairman of the working group of Committee 1.
I see a point of order from the distinguished delegate from Argentina.
Thank you, Mr. President. As you know, this paragraph, as we have it in Corrigendum 1, is a rather imbalanced one. It's rather lopsided. We understand full well the English version, but in the two times that the text was read out, the Spanish interpreter read out a translation which is not the one which we have used, which we interpret. As a matter of fact, he said, and I quote, in the final part, a que hace referencia las resoluciones adoptadas por la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas. And he left out the translation of the adverb as adopted. As adopted. My delegation therefore feels that the Spanish version, which was circulated, should read, referred to in the resolutions as adopted by the General Assembly of the United Nations.
I thank the distinguished representative of Argentina and called upon the expertise of the Secretary General who approves the distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Because the distinguished delegate from the Philippines had the floor when the point of order was brought up, and I would ask if this is on a point of order, then we can proceed. Otherwise, we return to the representative of the Philippines. Point of order.
I'm sorry, Mr. President, but in the French translation, I have exactly the same problem as my English-speaking friends. The translation distorts the meaning, and it should read in French as adopted by the General Assembly. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia, and we'll see that that correction is made. Then I return the floor to the distinguished representative of the Philippines, who I presume is making changes in the basic working document that have been agreed to within the working group. The distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I fully appreciate the preoccupations of our distinguished colleagues on this matter because this is a very important point. But I'm reading it in English, and therefore the translations should fall in line with the English language on this point. Paragraph 12, Mr. President. The second sentence and the very last line, page 4 of the English text, would read as follows. Part of the resources thus released should be utilized so as to achieve a better quality of life for humanity and particularly for the peoples of developing countries. I will repeat that, Mr. President. Part of the resources thus released should be utilized so as to achieve a better quality of life for humanity and particularly for the peoples of developing countries.
Point of order, the distinguished representative of Australia.
Mr. Chairman, a point of clarification. In the report of the working group, that's L11, in paragraph 7, it is indicated that revised draft for this paragraph was decided upon, and we were not advised this morning that that revision had been withdrawn, as we were for the other alteration. And you'll find that reported in part 2 of the report of the committee. Now, I'm simply seeking clarification from the distinguished delegate of the Philippines. Are we to assume that the changes in the first 2 sentences of that paragraph, which were previously agreed and reported, have now been withdrawn? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished delegate of Australia and call on the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
I apologize, Mr. President, for this inadvertence. Indeed, we approved this morning in Committee 1, paragraph 12, and I'll read it in full. Paragraph 12, page 4 of the English text. That is part 2. The waste and misuse of resources in war and armaments must be prevented. All countries must make a firm commitment to promote general and complete disarmament under effective international control, beginning with nuclear, in particular in the field of nuclear disarmament. Part of the resources thus released should be utilized so as to achieve a better quality of life for humanity, and particularly for the peoples of developing countries. This is the full text of para 12. In other words, in reply to the distinguished representative of Australia, we have not deleted the first part, the first two sentences of that paragraph.
I thank the distinguished representative from the Philippines and would give the floor to the distinguished representative of Australia.
Mr. Chairman, I continue to seek clarification. I did not ask whether you had deleted the first two sentences at all. I asked whether the words quoted in document L11 as an agreed change to the original draft of paragraph 12, which read, "The waste and misuse of resources in war and armaments should be prevented. All countries should make a firm commitment," etc. Now, this was before Committee 1 this morning. We were not advised that this had been, any change had been made in those words, and I again seek clarification. Are we now being advised that the words should, which had replaced must, have now been withdrawn?
I thank the distinguished representative from Australia. It appears to me that the distinguished representative from the Philippines is reading the revised version on document L11. It is in somewhat of a difficult state because nothing's been accepted here or agreed upon. We have a series of documents and some amendments, and I hope we're not doing it as we go along. I wonder if the distinguished representative of the Philippines could clarify this for us.
The correct text, Mr. President, is that one which appears in document A-70, stroke C1 L11, paragraph 7, which quotes paragraph 12.
I thank the distinguished representative from the Philippines for that clarification, and is that the clarification the distinguished representative from Australia? Wait, fine. Does the distinguished representative from the Philippines wish to continue? If I may interrupt the distinguished representative from the Philippines, if we're introducing the paper and they're not substantial changes, perhaps we should start moving in it phase by phase, starting with the preamble and going into sections 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3. And if there are any changes there, we can deal with them as they come up. The distinguished representative of the Philippines.
There is one more left, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. On on part 3, paragraph 19.
I must interrupt the distinguished representative from the Philippines. There's a point of order being raised on the part of the distinguished representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am aware that now an explanation has been given by the distinguished representative of the Philippines, which satisfies my delegation. But it should also be noted that in reading that text, he did not read the language which is contained in document C1/L11. So very specifically, I would like to know whether or not must or should would appear in the penultimate word in line 1 and would appear as the fourth word in line 2. This is a matter of some considerable importance, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States. I believe the word in there is should. I will ask for further clarification from the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
I had thought the distinguished representative of the United States has document L11 before him. That's why I did not read anymore the full text of paragraph 12. If he would like it that way, I would like to read it again, the full text of paragraph 12.
No, I don't think that is necessary. We have a lot of work to get through this afternoon. I think we should move through it. And if you can indicate the changes that have been made, and let's get on with the job. Sorry, the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. Para 19, as I was starting to read a while ago, on page 8 of the English text, the very last line of that paragraph, sellers should be buyers. Buyers, there is an apostrophe after S.
That assumes they have to be buyers before they can be sellers. I wanted to raise one question with the distinguished delegate from the Philippines on the document L11. There is the paragraph 16. Had that been decided by the working group?
Mr. President, the decision. On paragraph 16, there is a reference to it in the decision of the committee in A Conference 70/14. That is paragraph 11, subparagraph C. And I would read this part of the decision. A Conference 70 C1L11, Report of the Working Group on the Declaration of Principles. It should be noted that the representative of Iran, on behalf of the Group of 77, announced that in connection with the revised draft of paragraph 16, as contained in para 7 of the Report of the Working Group, the Group of 77 has decided to retain the original wording of the paragraph as contained in document A-Conf 70/C1/WG1 CRP1. In other words, on para 16, the original wording to which the Group of 77 has returned after the word abuse the words by the occupying power will be added. And I'll read it, I'll read the full sentence, the full paragraph. 16, historical settlements, monuments, and other items of national heritage, including religious heritage, should be safeguarded against any acts of aggression or abuse by the occupying power. This is now the text before the committee, or before the plenary.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines for clarifying these various points, for making the title more elegant and resolving the problems of paragraph 4 and others. The distinguished representative of Israel.
Ireland.
I'm sorry, the distinguished representative of Ireland.
Mr. Chairman, we have just heard from our Philippine colleague that according to him, the document CRP1 was, if I understood him correctly, the only document before us. I would point out with respect, Mr. Chairman, that as I understand the part 2 of the decision of the first committee, we have in fact before us several papers starting with A-Conf 70 bar 4, Draft Declaration of Principles. This document, as you are aware, was prepared by the Preparatory Committee, and though our distinguished colleague from the Philippines said earlier on that the document CRP1 was the only document before us which had the sponsorship of governments, I would humbly submit, Mr. Chairman, that the document of the Preparatory Committee representing the common opinion of representatives of 55 governments, of 56 governments, represented on that committee is equally entitled to be considered a document which has the sponsorship of the governments which participated in the work of the Preparatory Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland and would like to call upon the Secretary General for clarification of this point, as the draft declaration of principles was, I believe, his document.
Mr. President, I believe that the point was already resolved by the plenary to the effect that the document would be 70 GWG1 CRP1 and Car Addendum 1. But I should like to inform the distinguished delegate of Ireland that ARCOF 74 is not a document of the Preparatory Committee. The Secretariat received the advice, the council, the recommendations of the Preparatory Committee. But both this document as well as the other documents dealing with basic policy which were brought to the conference are documents only within the responsibility of the Secretary General of the conference. And the PrepCom did not have a chance to review them or revise them, and even less to adopt them prior to circulation on the basis of the recommendations received at the last meeting of the Preparatory Committee in January. The Secretary prepared documents on that basis, but the final text of these documents at no time was considered and even less adopted or recommended by the PrepCom. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished Secretary General. I gather the distinguished representative of the Philippines is proposing, or at least reporting from the committee, in the absence of the chairman, that this is the document that was the only effective working document within Committee 1 on the Statement of Principles.
Mr. Chairman, we have earlier decided that this is the case. This is the working paper here. This was the subject of statement also by the distinguished representative of Australia. So I think there is no problem about that. We have already gone into this document. And I think the explanation of the distinguished Secretary General of the Habitat is sufficient to explain that point. Mr. President, if I may continue, there is another amendment which I failed to state, and that refers to the preambular part, page 2 of the English text. It is the last sub-paragraph of the first two paragraphs on page 2 of the English text, starting with involuntary migration. Starting with involuntary migration. It is the very last part in the enumeration of sub-paragraphs. I would read the full text as amended by the group of 77. Involuntary migration, politically, comma, racially, comma, and economically motivated, comma, relocation and expulsion of people from their national homeland. I'll read it again. Involuntary migration, politically, racially, and economically motivated, relocation and expulsion of people from their national homeland. Those are all the amendments, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President. And now we offer this paper of the group of 77 for consideration by this conference. On behalf of the group of 77, I would propose the adoption of this resolution by consensus, without prejudice, of course, to the right of any delegation to present its position or make statements or reservations on the draft resolution. As I said before, Mr. Chairman, this has been the subject of intensive negotiations. The group of 77 has bent over backwards in an effort to achieve a consensus. In that spirit, Mr. President, I would commend this draft resolution for adoption by consensus with the qualifications I have stated. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines for presenting this paper and making the changes necessary to help us in our work in such a clear manner. The proposal is that we accept the document by consensus. It might be wise to start off and deal initially with the preambular portion. The distinguished representative of Ireland.
Mr. Chairman, without prejudice to the information which the Secretary General of Habitat has been good enough to give us a few moments ago, are we to understand, therefore, that the only paper which is before us at the moment is the paper as amended, the CRP1, and that in effect the paper Conf 70/4 is not to be considered as being a paper which is before us at this present moment. Secondly, if I might, through you, sir, address a question to our distinguished colleague of the Philippines, it would be to inquire what amendments, if any, have been accepted to this paper by members other than the group of 77. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland and call on the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think the first point has been raised already and already answered with respect to the status of the paper coming from the Secretariat. As regards the second point, in the report of the working group of Committee 1 on the Declaration of Principles, that is ACOM 70/14, I'm sorry, I'm referring to the reading document. In the report of, yes, the chairman of the working group on the Declaration of Principles, with the symbol ACOM 70/C1L11, on paragraph 3, I would draw the attention of the distinguished representative of Ireland to this paragraph, namely, subsequently the working group had before it, in document ACOM 70/C1, WG1, CRP1, and Corrigendum 1, the text of a draft Declaration of Principles submitted to the group by the group of 77. That text incorporated several of the amendments contained in document ACOM 70/C1L12 and Addendum 1 to 5. I think this is sufficient to answer his query. In other words, the amendments submitted by all delegations in writing and circulated have been taken into account in the drafting of this paper of the group of 77. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Philippines and I recognize the distinguished representative of Australia.
Mr. Chairman, I think I should say only that as far as the Western European and others group is concerned, no amendments of any kind or text of any kind has been accepted. And I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we move the proceedings along as rapidly as possible by taking this draft paragraph by paragraph and dealing with it now.
I thank the distinguished representative of Australia. The proposal originally put forth by the distinguished representative of the Philippines that this be accepted by consensus. There doesn't appear to be a consensus, but I will call on the distinguished representative of the Philippines.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I have to ask for the floor every now and then. In the meeting of the working group, the core working group of the Committee 1, which lasted for one whole night, one night in particular. Two representatives of the Western European and other states groups were represented, namely the distinguished representatives of the United States and the Netherlands. They participated in that working group as representative of the Western European and other states group. Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative from the Philippines. I have proposed, put your proposal of consensus before the conference. The distinguished representative of Australia has indicated that there is not such a consensus. I think it's then important that we proceed with the document. The distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I've properly understood the proposal made by the distinguished representative of Australia. It's the following. He said that he proposes that we should consider this document paragraph by paragraph. This could mean that we should ask if there are any objections to the first paragraph. If not, we adopt it. And when there are any kind of conflict, we should first try to find a consensus. And if Australia insists on a vote, then we would vote. But what I haven't understood in this proposal by my friend and colleague from Australia, will he ask for a vote on every paragraph? Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative from Tunisia. The chair's understanding of this would be that we proceed in an orderly way through the document. When we find areas of comment, we accept comment on those. I see the distinguished representative of Australia indicating that that is as he understands it, but the distinguished representative of Ireland is asking for the floor.
I'm sorry to have to take the floor once again, but I am grateful to our colleague of the Philippines for the explanation he has given us already in referring me to the report of the working group on the draft declaration principles. He has indicated that several of the amendments contained in the addenda to conference paper C1L2 have been incorporated in the draft of the 77, which we know of as CRP1. Mr. Chairman, in this connection, I should like to make a purely personal observation here. The delegation of Ireland submitted a number of amendments at an early stage on the draft declaration of principles, and to my knowledge, not a single one of them has been incorporated in the draft text of the 77 as tabled. I would therefore like to put a further question to my good colleague of the Philippines, if he would be good enough to indicate identify any other texts within that phrase, several amendments, which can be clearly identified as amendments presented by groups or members or delegates at this conference other than the group of 77. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the distinguished representative of Ireland, the distinguished representative of Algeria.
I apologize for taking the floor. I can't find an easy reply to my question. Have we had an answer to the question by Tunisia about our going through paragraph by paragraph this text, to the effect that it should be studied and to the extent possible adopted by consensus? Thank you, sir.
I thank the distinguished representative of Algeria and call on the distinguished representative of the USSR.
Mr. President, I should like to make a proposal which I think might facilitate our work. We're very familiar with this report of the working group, that to the effect that on the majority of the paragraphs, the draft declaration of the group of 77, which was adopted in the first committee, did achieve an agreement. but there are some paragraphs on which there is some disagreement. So I would propose that we should adopt those paragraphs which have been agreed and which do not give rise to objections, and then go on to those paragraphs which may require voting. Those paragraphs, in other words, which do give rise to objections. And I think it's essential that we should take a decision on every paragraph of this document, which has been a source of concern to us for several days and nights. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the USSR. That seems like an orderly procedure and one that seemed to find approval from those who have raised this question, where we move through the document in an orderly way, where there and not I would propose to dealing with it section by section, and then as we come to any paragraphs which cause difficulty, then that is discussed. I hope the interventions can be sharp and to the point, because there's a great deal to go through here. It's possible that we might find a greater degree of consensus than one imagines, and can get on to the document. I would like to bring this discussion on the procedure to a close as quickly as I possibly can, so that we can get to the document. I see that the distinguished representative of Belgium wishes the floor. The United States. No. The distinguished representative of the United Arab Emirates.
Thank you, Mr. President. Actually, I do not wish to present a new viewpoint, but I heard the President say that you support the idea of discussing this document paragraph by paragraph. I believe that what was said by my colleague, the representative of Tunisia, which was confirmed by what was said by the Soviet Union, is that we have already studied this document in the committees, or else what would be the use of having the committees work? If there are any observations, they can be made afterwards, and we can take a decision on all proposals with the exception of points which evoke controversy. And I propose that we complete consideration of this document as soon as possible. I believe this is going to save time, and all delegations now are about to leave this country. And I hope that we do not waste any more time or waste any more efforts by those working in this conference. Thank you, Mr. President.
Completely, and we will now hear lastly from the representative of the United States of America, and then get to the document.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Sir, my delegation has listened with considerable interest to the proposal by my distinguished colleague and friend from the Philippines that this document be adopted by consensus. We would very much have liked to be in a position to accept that proposal, but unfortunately are not. As the situation now stands, my delegation can assure you, sir, that there will be a request for votes on 12 paragraphs. This is likely to be a protracted process, unfortunately, and we fully recognize the desire of the spokesman for the group of 7 to 7 to save time, bearing in mind that virtually all delegations here have had considerable opportunity to deal with the draft document before us. Indeed, mine is virtually worn out. I'm sure I could quote it from memory. Therefore, as a possible way out of this, Mr. President, we would like to raise the possibility that a single vote be taken on the document as a whole, just one vote. and that thereafter delegations would be free to express their to make their explanations as they see fit, and such a procedure would thereby obviate the need for a para by para consideration. I emphasize that if there is a para by para, my delegation will be interested in votes on 12 paragraphs. Thank you, sir.
I call on the distinguished representative of Egypt.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. The Egyptian delegation wishes very much to thank the distinguished delegate of the United States for his very pragmatic compromise, and we wish very much to associate ourselves with this decision. Thank you very much.
Well, the proposal I see the distinguished representative of the USSR wishes the floor.
Mr. President, our delegation fully supports the proposal made by the distinguished representative of the United States. We think it's a very good proposal. Thank you.
I wish to thank the distinguished representative of the USSR. We call this Russian roulette in my country. The distinguished representative of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before, on behalf of my own delegation and perhaps on behalf of other friendly delegations, before giving our viewpoint on the proposal of the distinguished representative of the United States, I should like a point in his proposal to be clarified through you, sir. If I understand